Thanks for tuning in to That's What I Call Marketing, the Cannes Sessions. Brought to you by Freedman International, the international campaign experts taking the pain out of your multi-market campaigns. I'm your host, Conor Byrne, and having worked with Freedman International in my previous role as a global marketing leader, I've experienced firsthand their deep level of expertise and attention to detail as the go-to experts for all international campaign needs. Now, let's get right into today's episode of That's What I Call Marketing, the Cannes Sessions. Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the Cannes Sessions, brought to you by Freedman International. Of course, this is the podcast where you'll hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Don't forget, please do rate or review this episode wherever you're listening or watching. It really helps us reach and build on this amazing community of engaged marketers just like you. And if you're interested in getting involved with That's What I Call Marketing, our sponsorship kit is now available on our website, that'swhaticallmarketing.com/sponsor. On to today's episode. And in today's episode, I meet Chidi Achara, who's the Chief Product Officer of Huge. We're going to delve into his journey in the advertising and marketing world. We reflect on the foundational years where he worked at the likes of Gray, BBH. He learned valuable lessons about strategic thinking, creative storytelling, and relationship management. And these skills were put into use while managing the Levi's account globally and creating the establishment of BBH New York. We cover Chidi's shift to client side with Nike, where he led a creative team to relaunch the iconic Cole Haan brand, and also discuss his time at Simon. This background culminated in Chidi landing into his current role as Chief Product Officer at Huge, where he focuses on integrating AI and technology to create intelligent experiences that are highly personalized and conversational. We touch on maintaining client relationships, the shift towards outcome-based agency models, and the critical role of visionary leadership, and also touch on Chidi's involvement with an organization that I've been a huge fan for a long time, Charity Water. And we discuss how transparency and technology and impactful communications in the nonprofit sector really make a difference. Throughout our discussion today, themes of innovation, relationships, future of marketing are explored, and it really is a must-listen episode for anyone who's interested in the evolving landscape of advertising and technology, with a fascinating, really engaging, interesting guest, Chidi Achara.
Yeah, I give you a nice branding. Yeah, I like that.
Thanks so much for joining me on That's What I Call Marketing. It's great to meet you here at Cannes.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Conor.
Nice to get out of the heat for a few minutes. And
absolutely.
In the salubrious surrounds.
Exactly. Enjoy the luxury of the Carlton. Why not?
All good. Well, listen, I'd love to, for people who may not know you, talk a bit about maybe your background. I was reading that you spent time at Gray and BBH, incredible places to work. You reflect about that time in those agencies. What are the kind of things you were working on, and kind of what's your fond memories, I guess, of those places?
Yeah, so I think, that was the first phase of my career. I came out of university. I was desperate to work in advertising. It sort of captured my imagination. I always wanted to work at BBH. I started off with Gray, which was a great training ground at the time. And eventually transitioned to BBH about 18 months later. And I think it really, it helped me learn at a very early stage. I think the three key components of success in our business. One is the ability to think strategically. The other is to understand the power of creative ideas and storytelling. And then the third component is the ability to sort of manage relationships, both internally and also with clients. And, often you'll find people are really good at one or two of those. I think, what I learned from some of the master operators at BBH was the importance of being able to combine all three. My key area of responsibility was running the Levi's account for many years and running that internationally, so globally outside of the US at the time, and then worked to help BBH win the US business, and was a part of the sort of early team that was planting the seeds of opening up BBH New York back in the day. And it was a really exciting time because it was one of the first times that a UK-based agency had the global business from a US-based, iconic brand like Levi's. So those were good times. But I think it was just a fantastic sort of like combination of like a university and a boot camp,
right?
Kind of baptism of fire, but learning from some of the best. And so much of what I learned in the first 4 to 5 years of my career have been completely foundational to the way that I think and operate and lead now.
Wow. Can I ask you to hold the mic a little bit closer?
Oh, yeah,
just
sorry.
to be sure. Sorry.
Yeah.
Just fascinating. I'm always interested because I think people, like when I meet people through the marketing podcast, that there's either people who kind of have fallen into marketing or like you were obsessed and wanted to get into it. Was there a moment where you were like, I don't know, like people said, actually a friend of mine saw Levi's ad and he was like, that's why I want to be in advertising. Was there a moment like that for you?
Yeah, there was actually. It was a very long time ago. I just happened to be watching TV one night with a couple of friends, and there was a show, and it was basically an interview with John Hegarty, who at the time I didn't know who he was, and I didn't know who BBH was. But I can't remember the exact name of the show, but he was showing sort of examples of their work and talking about how they created these ads. And it was incredible ads for things like Levi's that you mentioned, for Audi and others. And I was sitting there with my mates and I was like, oh my God, when we were in college, these were the ads that we actually loved, right?
Yeah.
There was that old saying back in the UK that the adverts were better than the telly.
Yeah.
Right? Like, hear people talk about, when the ads come on, they go and, grab a beer or whatever. It was the opposite. It's like you did that when the TV came on. When the adverts were on, you were like transfixed. And so that was literally my sort of epiphany light bulb moment, was seeing John, who I'm actually going to see this week in Cannes, which is really exciting, like many, many years ago, and who's always been a mentor and inspiration for me, seeing him talk through that work and realizing that it wasn't just advertising, it was culture.
Yeah.
I mean, it was defining the look and the feel and the storytelling of culture. This is what people were talking about, in pubs and parties. Did you see that new Levi's ad? Did you see that Audi? Oh, it's so cool. Like, it became a part of the cultural vernacular in a way that was extremely exciting to be a part of, creating work that you knew that people around you were going to be discussing and impacted by.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's so exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, it was amazing. It was an amazing time. Yeah.
I know it was different because there was less things for people to look at. But you went then, am I right? You went on to Nike after that?
Yeah, my first move onto the client side was at Nike Inc. And I ran a creative team that was responsible for relaunching one of their brands called Cole Haan, which is an iconic shoe brand in the US, a bit like Clarks or Church's in the US to a degree. In the UK to a degree. And that was really fascinating. That was a really interesting moment. I'd worked very briefly for BBH in New York, and we were working on Cole Haan, and I transitioned in-house. And what they identified at the time was that it was sort of like the type of brand that everybody had connected with or had an interaction with at some point.
Okay.
Right? Like, at some point, whether it's your parents or grandparents or whatever, but that was part of the problem, was that the average age of the user was like, or the buyer was like 48 years old.
Right, okay.
So they were essentially
left.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And once people sort of hit that age and into their 50s and 60s, they don't really buy a lot of new stuff. So we had to kind of reposition it for a younger generation. So that was really the challenge at hand for us, was like, how do we take the DNA of these extremely well-made shoes that now, because they were owned by Nike, had Nike Air injected into the soles. So they kind of had this sort of kinetic comfort, dynamism about them.
Right.
But they still on the top, they could look as like you could walk into a business meeting or into like, a party or dinner or whatever. So there was this kind of day to night 24/7 thing. So that was really interesting experience, looking at relaunching a brand from the inside with the resources and insight and support of, an incredible organization like Nike. And that got me a little bit of a taste for working in-house and building in-house creative teams and in-house digital product and digital marketing teams, which I did for about 10 years.
I was going to ask how that felt, because it is very different working in agency to in-house. Did you kind of start to understand things that might have frustrated you when you were at an agency? Like, what's the client doing?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, because, what I realized was, at the time, I don't think, and this is a vast generalization, but I don't think that client-agency relationships were necessarily at their most constructive at the time.
Okay.
It was like digital and social were accelerating. A lot of the agencies were kind of, really kind of challenged to kind of understand that new terrain and help clients navigate it. And so what I realized, actually, that for me, it was much more expedient for me to build internal creative teams. So it was sort of like the beginning of that in-house agency wave.
Yeah.
And what I liked about running in-house teams was that you could move incredibly quickly because you didn't have that tension,
Yeah.
sort of us and them, that you sometimes
yeah.
find between agencies and clients. But that, I admit that dynamic tension can be very creative and very constructive. But particularly in retail, you just need to move fast. It's
Right.
like, shoes were down this weekend, handbags were down, or t-shirts were up. Like, we're gonna get all over it. So it's like Tuesday, you're sort of like having a brainstorming, and you need to launch a new campaign that weekend. That's sometimes hard to do when you're working with certain types of agencies.
Yes. Yeah,
So
yeah.
I did enjoy the kind of speed and the velocity and the control that we had from working in house. But I think what you miss is a sort of more broad global insights, if you like, that an agency can bring because
Yeah.
they're working with so many
things.
different
Yeah.
clients and so many different categories. They're seeing so many trends and patterns and developing those insights that could be valuable for your business. So, there's pros and cons of either approach, to be honest.
It's like everything in marketing. It's not either or, is it?
Yeah,
Like, you know what I
exactly,
mean? Like, there's no
exactly.
one answer to
No,
it.
totally. You can do both ways successfully.
Yeah. And a lot of actually in-house teams will use agencies probably for that reason
Yeah,
as well, because
yeah.
you get that wider thinking, but they use them for different things. Maybe when they don't need to move as fast, kind of the bigger briefs or that kind of thing.
No, absolutely. And I joke often with my newish colleagues. It's huge. There was a time when I was looking at doing a digital experience project, and I reached out to a bunch of different agencies. The usual suspects. This was like 7 or 8 years ago. Whoever were the leaders at the time, I don't need to call them out by name, but Huge were too busy to kind of like even meet with me.
Okay.
You know what I mean, the business was definitely booming, and they were, I think at some point they said they were working with like 50% of the Fortune 100 companies. So it was like it was an incredible time for Huge. But to your point, that was the type of expertise that we were not able to develop in-house. And therefore, an agency like Huge would have been hugely useful for us, or a similar type of agency.
I'm going to get on to Huge in just 1 minute, but you had then another role working in retail again. Kind of
for Simon. Yeah.
And that was like international, wasn't it, as well? They're in a lot of different countries. I'd love to talk. I'm fascinated. I was saying to you before, I worked in an international role, lots of different markets, and there's lots of challenges with that. Of trying to figure out what are the things we need to do differently, but what are the things we can do that are the same and that can scale. I'd love to get your take on and your experience at Simon, kind of with that international remit.
Yeah, so when I joined Simon, and for those who don't know Simon, it's the world's largest retail real estate group. So they own shopping malls around the world. So when I joined, there was about 320 shopping centers around the world that they owned. Throughout North America, including Mexico, but also Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Malaysia, I believe, a couple of other countries. And it was a really interesting time because what they identified was that they had a world-class business that was incredibly successful and growing and very reputable. Like, they were considered gold standard in that world. I mean, Westfield was probably the closest competitor internationally, but they hadn't really invested in their brand.
Right.
And they felt that, and we felt, as I was talking to them, that we were leaving a lot of value on the table when it came not just to like shoppers, but also the brands that we wanted to have in the centers, the retailers, the media and PR, and also investors and Wall Street. There was a lot of money that was being left on the table because we hadn't invested in building this world-class brand that could reflect the value of the business, but also accelerate growth. Okay. And so it was, how do we take the essence of what we bring to the market for a range of different constituents and audiences, some of which I've just mentioned, in a way that is unified globally, but also as a brand system and a design identity has enough flexibility to accommodate some of the nuances of the individual markets, right? So particularly markets like Japan, which is I know you have experience in Japan. There's a very, should I say, established set of conventions around marketing and advertising in that particular market, and it's a strong market. It's slightly different in Korea, and there were certain markets where we could essentially just export what we did in the US or North America, and then certain markets where we had to like really find this balance, this nuanced balance between what would work in the US and what would work in that particular market. I mean, these sort of issues that global marketers and advertisers have been grappling with for decades. So it's nothing new, but I think what was very interesting about that time was it wasn't just a bunch of ad campaigns we invested very heavily in digitizing the business. So our websites were incredibly important. So we relaunched. Every center had its own website, plus there were global websites. So we're talking about relaunching sort of 300 plus websites. We built a bunch of different apps, the shopping app, parking apps, cinema apps, food apps. The idea was that if you could remove the friction using digital and physical channels to get people into the centers, spending more time, increasing dwell time, for every minute that they spent in the center, extra minute, it was an extra $1.
Wow.
Which doesn't sound like a lot of money, but when you have 100 million visitors a year, it adds up to proper money. And so that was really what we were trying to do, was to sort of elevate the overall experience around the world, increase dwell time, and also attract a new generation of brands that people didn't typically expect to see in a mall. So things like, brands like Warby Parker or Harry's razors, or at the time it was brands that were super hot like Casper mattresses and Peloton, etc. Tesla. I think there's about 50 Apple stores and Simon Centers. So those were the real kind of like traffic drivers for the younger generation of shoppers, right? So it was an incredibly exciting time. Learned a lot, worked with some great people.
And again, like if you think like very, very different from, the Gray BBH days, totally different thing. And then, as you say, recently moved to Huge. Tell me a bit about kind of how that came about.
Yeah, well, actually, in between Huge.
Oh, I missed a step.
No, it's all good because it'll make more sense for the reason why I moved to Huge. But between Simon and Huge, I spent a number of years working in tech startup world.
Okay.
So that, again, I would say that my career sort of had three chunks, right? Prior to Huge, it was sort of more traditional creative agencies we discussed. Then it was in-house on the client side, and then it was startup side. And that's where I really fell in love with the nuts and bolts of building digital products. Understanding, sort of product strategy, UX, research, development, engineering, etc. Bringing all of those different disciplines around the table. I worked at a larger startup, I don't even think you can call it a startup now, but it's still a VC-backed company, an investing app called Stash, and then more recently, I was working at an AI startup called Brain AI, which was one of the pioneers of generative interfaces. Really interesting, cutting-edge work in that field. Much smaller than someone like OpenAI, but actually working with similar technologies. And that's what led me to Huge, because it was almost like a culmination of so many different things that I'd done, working on the agency side, being able to work with world-class brands, but also injecting new emerging technologies into building these amazing digital experiences.
Perfect storm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I hope so.
And so you're Chief Product Officer at Huge, probably quite a broad and big question to ask, what are you focusing on? But what are you focusing on?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So my remit, we've had a chief product officer role for a while, but it's retooled since my arrival. So effectively, for those who aren't super familiar with Huge, we're a design and innovation company, and we create digital products and experiences for a number of world-class brands. And Google's our biggest client. We've been working with Google for over 10 years, and we've probably built 100 plus different projects for them. So the CPO's role really is to oversee our key teams, which are the creative and design teams, so the folks who actually design these experiences, and also the tech team who help build the experiences, as well as a real heavy focus on introducing new technologies, particularly AI, and making sure that internally we're retooled, that we have the right tooling that we need to build the next generation of what we call intelligent experiences. So those are experiences that are built with AI, but also are AI experiences that we're creating for our clients in order to drive, more engagement for their experiences.
Can you give me an example of what an intelligent experience is, just kind of to bring it to life?
Yeah, I think, I'll just step back for a second, just think and just speak a little bit more philosophically about what we mean by that. And then, our point of view is that the future of digital is going to be highly personalized and intelligent. And by that, we mean that emerging technologies like AI will enable us to create experiences, digital experiences that feel increasingly conversational, human-like, contextual. And so examples of that are, using AI tools to automate certain aspects of the creative and development process in ways that haven't been done before. So it's like how we build, but also what we build. So, at the moment, let's just sort of pull the thread a little bit on conversational interfaces. At the moment, a conversational interface is typically considered to be like a chatbot sitting in the bottom right of a screen, right?
Yeah.
And you ask them questions, and we've had chatbots for a long time, and with varying degrees of accuracy or
frustration,
frustration or sophistication, right? But how do we think beyond that? How do we think about, instead of having a more static digital experience where you're pressing a bunch of buttons and everybody's pressing the same buttons and getting the same outputs, how can you create experiences that are highly personalized, customizable, and contextual for the actual user? So the example that I always give is like, if you go onto, let's say a search site and you're trying to find a vacation in Hawaii, the search site will know what you want based on the buttons that you're clicking, but it will not know your intent. It won't know why you want to go to Hawaii. Do you want to go to Hawaii because you want to celebrate an anniversary, because you're burnt out and you want to get away from everything, because you're a nature lover? But if you start with a sort of conversation, almost like going back to the old days where you would sit in front of a travel agent and they would ask you a bunch of questions, and then they would sort of craft an itinerary that was based upon your needs and your wants. Why can't we do that in the digital space? What we've done is we've gone from like that human interaction, which was very, very labor intensive and sort of, costly in terms of time, right? You had to go to a place and sit down and take an hour or whatever. And then we sort of like standardized it across a bunch of different digital experiences where you could tap buttons and it would, put together a trip for you, but wouldn't really know exactly why you were taking the trip. Essentially what we're talking about the intelligent experiences is to combine the two.
Right.
All right. So there becomes intent-aware software that actually understands what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, and can get you to your destination or to your request and your need in a much more efficient and effective way.
And isn't that, because I just love that, because when we talk about AI and technology, there's some fear definitely about it. But that's such a wonderful example of how you kind of almost bring humanity back into an experience for somebody, that we've lost a bit because we went to what's the way we can scale the response to this question as fast as possible, but actually getting something that means and is more meaningful to somebody is really, really exciting.
Yeah, no, I think I totally understand the concerns and the fears about AI on multiple different levels, but I think there is so much potential to create experiences that are very uplifting and enriching, right? I think it's the question of how we deploy AI. And I think as marketers, we don't want to do it in ways that feel stunty or gimmicky. We have to do it in ways that actually are meaningful, that sort of elevate the experience, that ultimately we want to drive deeper connectivity with consumers, with people, everyday people, and be able to meet their needs more efficiently and effectively.
Yeah. And again, it's great for brands because brands are actually able to scale that human interaction and emotional connection with people, because scale is something that, all brands, we look for, right? You look for, how do we do this? How do we do it at scale? Because it's expensive to do things in that one-to-one. I was reading a bit about the culture decoder and creative capital index tools. Can you tell me a bit about them? I was fascinated when I was reading, but I was like, I need to find out more.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting, and this obviously, a lot of this predates me, but we're doubling down on some of these AI investments. Huge started building out an AI-powered data lake probably 3 years ago, and it's essentially a data lake that ingests about 110 different data reports every month, and so it has over 1 billion data touch points. Wow. And that's across business intelligence, brand and marketing intelligence, digital behaviors, social media, news, reviews, etc. And that data lake is the foundation upon which these marketing applications are built. So Cultural Decoder and CCI. Cultural Decoder is essentially real-time insights into trends, consumer trends, and how they're impacting brands. Okay. So, for instance, one of the clients that we work with is Jeep, and there is this phenomenon in America over the last few years. I think it started during COVID, where it sounds crazy, but it's true. Where Jeep drivers, for some reason, put rubber ducks on each other's cars. It's like a symbol of unity, right? And it's
Really?
like, yeah, it's like a thing.
That's brilliant.
It's a thing. And then, so people start collecting these rubber ducks. They call it ducking people. And so you'll see that people are driving around the States with on their dashboard, they have like 6 or 7 different rubber ducks, right? That's the sort of behavior that we can pick up on in real time. And then, I mean, I'm just using that as an example, like, obviously, you would say to a brand like Jeep, you want to lean into that and embrace that, right? That is grassroots community love for your brand. That is so much more powerful than any ad campaign. How can you fan that flame, right? How can you amplify that? So but there's other trends that might percolate up through Culture Dakota that you may say, okay, you know what, that's a trend, but we're not going to touch it right now because it's not right for us, right? But the idea is that you know what consumers are thinking, doing, and how they're behaving in real time. Through this aggregation of different sources, and then that intelligence can be used by brands strategically to decide whether they want to deploy a particular, activation, or they want to lean into it, or whether they just want to monitor it, or whether they actually want to stay away from it. So that's CD. So CCI is a different type of application. It essentially measures a business strengths or weaknesses across brand offerings and experience. And what I think is really important about this is in our business, whatever type of agency you are, or client really, marketing organization, you need to be able to understand whether the stuff you're doing is actually working and moving the needle forward. So this is the age-old conversation that we've had, is we spend, as an industry, millions and billions creating a bunch of different types of assets, campaigns, activations, experiences, but often it's hard to track ROI. Is this stuff really moving the needle forward? And so what we've invested in is setting up a set of benchmarks, a framework, metrics that will allow clients and ourselves to measure the outcomes based on inputs.
Right.
So, if you invest significant resources in elevating your digital experience, for instance, or building out your digital ecosystem, or launching a new app, or targeting new audiences, we should expect to see the impact of those investments captured by CCI. In terms of the perceptions of the brand, perceptions of the offerings, business engagement, business growth, value added, et cetera. So that's essentially what CCI is, because we believe that increasingly the work that we do in order to create and capture value needs to be strategically driven. It needs to be data informed, and it needs to be linked to outcomes, and not just the amount of man hours or people hours, women hours that we put into the work. It needs to be linked to results and outcomes for our clients.
And this is a big thing, and kind of what drew me to finding out more about Huge when I'd heard about this, because it is a tale as old as time, really, where the client agency relationship can kind of get in trouble when it's the hours, and it's all about the hours. And I'm not saying you don't track hours. I'm not sure, but it is more output based. How that evolution must have been a big shift for clients and agencies and the agency.
Yeah, and it's very true. It's a great observation, and it's a transformation that's still taking place. It's not like a one and done thing, and we do it on a client by client basis. But effectively, we need to move to a place where we are rewarded for value added over hours and input. So it's more about the outcomes, and it's more about the output and the quality and the value of the deliverables for driving business growth than it is, rate cards and timesheets and the number of people working on a project and, margin management through that process, which is typically how agencies have done it for a generation now. And I think that, one of the biggest obstacles to that is often internal.
Right.
People are so used to doing it this way, then when we try and step out of that box and do it a different way, people are like, well, they feel a little bit uncomfortable. But actually what we need to do is we recognize that the value of agencies is that we bring together a bunch of very smart people from very diverse backgrounds with incredible insights to kind of swarm a client challenge or opportunity and unlock growth for them, right? And transformation and unfair advantage, we like to call it. Why not reward that based on the value of the outcomes, as opposed to just like, oh, we need to pay all these people to do this work, but we'd actually know what value the work is going to bring to the business, right? It's just kind of flipping the script on the way that we perceive and the way that we creating capture value and present that to clients. And often when you have those conversations with clients, they're very open to it. You know, sometimes there can be a sliding scale in terms of like how, you know, your pricing structure is actually linked to specific outcomes. Sometimes it can be more fixed price. But I think there's a degree of confidence and you're all aligned and focused on achieving the highest quality outcome, as opposed to like, what are the inputs to get there, right? Yeah. Rewarding agencies based on inputs doesn't make sense. Rewarding agencies based on outcomes and results makes perfect sense.
I love unfair advantage. That's brilliant. Because what client doesn't want an unfair advantage in this marketplace?
Exactly.
But then on the client side, I guess, because one of the things I've seen certainly from agency and client side is the transfer of information from the client to the agency to help them understand the impact of the outcomes. Like that must be an evolution as well, because you're going to need that data, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, don't get me wrong, it's not always a linear process, right? It's a learning process. It's a completely different way of working with clients, and it definitely demands a higher degree of trust, credibility, and transparency. Because to your point, you're going to have to access to data points that you may not necessarily have had in the past in order to more accurately assess the impact of the work, right? And often it's the impact is not just based on the input from the work of the agency, right? There can be many different factors, macroeconomic factors, competitive factors, pricing factors, distribution factors, a bunch of different other factors that could determine the outcome.
Yeah.
But we have an army of data scientists. Some of them are, all of them I think are top tier, but I was going to say some of them are like, PhD level thinkers. And we do have the tools, if our clients are willing to collaborate with us, where we can actually build, pretty sophisticated measurement structures and frameworks that allow us to more accurately assess the impact of the work if we have access to that data.
I remember the first time I got to work with data scientists, and I was just like, oh, wow, this changes the game.
They make you feel real dumb. You're like, okay.
I realized I just had to...
I'm not the smartest person in the room by a mile.
I realized I just had to be able to know what question to ask.
Exactly.
That was the key.
And which question to ask to not look dumb.
What do you think?
Exactly. No, definitely.
But it is a game changer and for me, it was bringing the data scientists and that team in really early, here's what we're trying to figure out. And then they were able to kind of say, well, if we do these things, we'll be able to get a read on it.
Yeah.
As opposed to us going, and we did it. We were like, go and do something and then go, can we analyze this? And they're like, no, it's set up completely wrong.
No, totally. You want to get them early in the process.
Yeah.
You want to get them super early in the process. And that's why I think like the old sort of cascading waterfall of, you go from client brief to strategy and research, and then you go into design, and then you go into development and building the experience. Like we need to sort of break up those silos. We need to rethink the way that we work collectively in a sort of unsiloed, unfettered way, so that we can draw on the creativity that's coming from all of these different teams and these different like functional leaders, including data science. Like get them early in the process so that we can, and also developers and engineers, so we can understand the art of the possible. As opposed to trying to figure it out on the later in the process when we've already built the thing the wrong way. And then we're sort of grappling in the dark, basically.
We go sell something and like, we can't build that.
Exactly. That is not. I mean, particularly in the age of intelligent experiences, where we're building something that's never been done before. From building the types of. This is what I find really exciting about IX is, we kind of understand how websites work. We sort of understand how apps work. We've seen these things for a while. Ad campaigns, obviously. But there's this whole new generation of experiences that we're starting to see little sort of green shoots sprouting up, but we haven't seen the full like puzzle yet. And we're just putting together little pieces of it. We're doing some work with Google where we're injecting AI and intelligence into some of their consumer-facing experiences. And there's a couple of other clients that we've announced recently. We're doing some really interesting work with a company called Darling Ingredients. Darling Ingredients is a world-leading company that just takes the stuff that's wasted.
Okay.
Agricultural waste, food waste, etc., and it turns it into amazing usable products. So it's a part of the circular economy. And we used their website that we just launched for them used entirely AI-generated imagery.
Oh, wow.
Or we gave them a library of entirely AI-generated imagery that, achieved incredible efficiencies in terms of their production budget, but also exceptionally high-quality imagery that spoke to the kind of their corporate positioning, and particularly reflected the kind of organic, natural aspect of their work. So those are a couple of examples. We're doing some work with Hublot, the watch company. These are watches that are selling for like $50,000 to $100,000, right? They're major investments, and there's a sort of white glove service that you expect in a luxury boutique.
Yeah.
How do we replicate that in the digital space, where it feels very high touch, it feels very personalized, it feels very human, which typically hasn't happened when you go onto a luxury website. It still just feels like a website.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The images might be
watch.
exactly. The images might be more sophisticated, and maybe the fonts are nicer. But effectively, it's a website, right? So those are some of the early explorations. We haven't cracked the code yet, but we think we're probably closer than most to getting there, and that's really going to be part of the focus of the agency going forward.
It's incredible. How do you kind of keep innovation and creativity and kind of that culture in your team, and I guess along with that, keep focus?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That and focus and accountability as well is really important for me and for us as a leadership team. So I think that there's an old proverb which is that people perish for lack of vision. You need to start with a vision, right? If you don't have a vision, a North Star of where you're heading and why you're heading there and what the definition of great looks like, then it's very hard to drive that culture of innovation and engagement and creativity. That's something that I learned very early in my career at BBH. There was a very clear definition of what great looked like, and that greatness was expected from everybody across the board on all accounts. And that's what we're trying to instill at Huge. We're spending a lot of time socializing with the organization, like what do we think the definition of great looks like in this next generation of digital experiences and products, and what IX is, giving them a very clear understanding of what it means. It's more than just a chat bot. It's so many different things that we can explore in terms of how we build and what we build. And getting people really connected to that vision and excited about that vision. If that vision doesn't excite you, that's fine, right? There may be other companies with different visions that you find more compelling and more exciting. But if you want to be at Huge, this is where we think the future of our business lies. And we're seeing an incredible rejuvenation of energy. Right, there's a lot of people that are super excited. We're hiring some incredible talent. We just hired a new.
I was going to ask you some recent hires.
Absolutely, and those are folks who are coming on board who have a very clear understanding of what we're trying to achieve with the business right now. We have a new global CCO, a new global CTO, an exec creative director who's going to run our Google business. These are all world-class talents who've worked at incredible places and great agencies. And they're super excited to come to Huge to help us build this future business.
It's incredible, and they've just announced in the last couple of days.
New
hires.
Absolutely. I think our CTO started 3 weeks ago. Our CCO started 2 weeks ago, and our new ECD on Google starts in like a week.
Wow.
And actually, the CTO is a boomerang. He was at Huge previously, and left and did some really cool things in the crypto space, and then at Valtech, and now he's come back to us, which is a great sort of stamp of endorsement for great talent is sort of gravitating towards us and also coming back to us
based on this new
based on the vision that we have. Yeah. For me, I always believe in visionary leadership. It starts with the vision. Yeah. You need to develop the strategy to execute that vision. You need the right talent in place. You need the right processes, tools, and structures, and you need to be able to measure success and pivot accordingly, right? Just like if you're building any product or any business, you can't always just stay stuck in mud in your lane. Like you have to read the market, but also know how to apply your vision in dynamic terrain, which is what we operate in.
It's really interesting, and I spoke to an Irish agency recently, and we talked about creativity, and we spoke a lot about process in that interview, and we were kind of almost joking through it, going, "Oh my God, this is an episode about creativity, and all we're doing is talking about process." But I was kind of making the point that it's actually really important, like you're saying, to have process and structure in place, because almost take creativity. I think creativity needs a process, which is almost the space then to be creative. But if you can't create the process to have space to be creative, you'll never be creative.
No, absolutely. Look, there's a lot of people who really believe in creative chaos. I think it's like creativity is, that old sort of, I think it was Woody Allen or one of those guys who said something like, 90% perspiration, 10% inspiration, right? You can say it's like 90% process, and then 10% sort of chaos. But that chaos has to be constructive chaos,
Yeah.
right? Otherwise it can become quickly destructive and kind of sap energy. BBH was one of the most process-oriented organizations that I ever worked at. There was very clear, structured process, but those lanes allowed you to innovate and be creative extremely effectively because you knew what the boundaries were, so to speak. Like you might say, oh, well, the whole point of creativity is there's no boundaries. Like, yes, to a degree, but we're working we're not in fine art, right?
Yeah, yeah.
This is commercial creativity, so it's meant to achieve a business objective. So you do need the process to push the creativity towards the right objective.
Yeah.
So we're in the process of reimagining our processes in order to further fuel creativity, not limit it,
Yes.
but actually accelerate it.
Yeah. No,
Yeah. So I totally agree with what you and your friend were discussing.
The client relationships we talked a bit about, but there's been longevity, I think, with a lot of the clients. How important has that been? I mean, client relationships are crucial, but I think, in terms of this evolution as well, like the conversations, and has it allowed Huge to maybe elevate the conversations to the C-suite, maybe CFO? Because some of the stuff you're talking about, I often hear, like, there's definitely things CFOs care about.
Yeah. No, definitely. No, I mean, we've been very fortunate, and some of our clients, we have access to the C-suite as much as we need to.
Yeah.
And that could be CEOs, it could be CFOs, but also we have a range of internal stakeholders that we work with, So it is CMOs, as you would expect, but also, CIOs, Chief Innovation and Chief Information Officers, CTOs, Chief Design Officers, like the full gamut, because often the experiences that we build are either shared by the C-suite leaders or, they'll fall in one or the other, but they typically tend to be a collaboration, right? Because they're so important to the business.
Yeah.
In terms of the longevity of the relationships, like I said, we've been with Google for over 12 years. I feel McDonald's is like 7 years. Ublo, I mentioned, I think is between 5 and 7 years. So we do have pretty long-standing relationships, and those are just a few. There's others that I can mention, and some that have been with us a very long period of time in the past. And a lot of that is based on everything you would expect in a great relationship, right? Maintaining the chemistry, the credibility, the trust, the transparency, and creating a sense of partnership. So you don't have that us and them thing that we talked about earlier, right? It's like, we really are getting under the hood of their businesses. We're getting access to some of the most critical data, and we're helping them to drive growth in very tangible, measurable, and meaningful ways, right? So it's not just like, brand awareness or brand affinity that you sometimes get with big ad campaigns. We can actually see what buttons are being clicked, what businesses are being driven, what conversion rates are increasing, what lifetime value is being accelerated, et cetera. So I think that we try to think more in terms of collaborative partnerships, regular workshopping, regular sprint cadence, so that, there's not some big unveil moment at the end, right? Like, we just gone into our cave for 6 weeks and now we come out with the answer to all of your problems. It's not that type of process. It's much more iterative and collaborative and transparent along the way.
I have a great short story of somebody who went through that experience of, agency went away, the big ta-da moment, and the response from the person was, can I just talk about my degrees of disappointment? Because there's maybe something not fundamentally flawed, but again, I don't think the client needs to be in everything, but like waiting that long and all that time potentially wasted. I love that kind of getting in and working collaboratively, but also knowing when to be in and when to be out. Do you know? Like it's hard to manage, isn't it?
It is, but I think those are the definitions of great client partnership leaders, right? We have a client partnership leadership team, and they are very skilled at understanding how to build those relationships of trust. To your point, knowing when to lean in, and maybe when to step back, and that's a craft. Just as much as designing or engineering or strategy, it's a craft. It's learned over time. It's role modeled, and there's best practices, and we're continuing to learn those and pass those on to our team. And they change over time, right? The type of relationships that you need to build with clients in the age of intelligent experiences and AI are going to be similar but somewhat different. Right? You need access to different data points. You need different skill sets. You need a different tolerance for risk. You need a different understanding of brand reputation. AI Gen AI still somewhat hallucinates from time to time, right?
Yeah.
That's a very real thing, right? It's not 100% accurate or reliable all the time. So there's a level of ambiguity that is different from like an ad campaign or a more traditional website build that I think collectively we need to embrace and understand together.
Yeah, and it's always evolving. I think for me, it's the curiosity and people wanting to learn, and evolve with it, know, because we're in a great business to be curious.
No, absolutely. This is a business for, curious, intelligent, hardworking, open-minded individuals.
Have fun. And we are at Cannes, obviously. What are you looking forward to this week? This is going to go out afterwards, so I should be asking, what did you enjoy? But
yeah, I know. Well, you know what? This is literally the first morning. All I've had is had breakfast. I haven't done anything yet. And, I think there's just a bunch of the world's most creative, interesting, smartest people, right? Even on the plane, I met like an amazing guy from Microsoft. And, it's like the plane was just full of like Cannes people coming from London to Nice. And so, look, I'm here like with an open mind to learn. I'm very interested in the conversations that are taking place around AI. I think all of the big platforms and the big groups are talking about AI and its impact on the business in the future. But also other things like sustainability, DEI. There's just so much going on in the business at the moment. That my agenda is just to learn and to meet some interesting people. That's it. I'm not here to like hunt down clients. I don't think that stuff doesn't work. I'm not that guy.
You're not that guy.
I'm definitely not that guy. I'm actually here more to learn and just to meet some cool people.
I did want to ask you one last question. I used to go way back. You're going to wonder how many lives I've had. I used to work in the non-profit sector. Okay. I know you've done. Are you still involved with charity?
Absolutely, yes.
Water?
Still on the board with Charity Water. Yeah.
I like when I was working. It goes way back. They were kind of coming out, and I was amazed by not only the work they were doing, but how they were communicating. It was phenomenal. It's an amazing organization doing amazing work. What's your work on the board with them? What are you doing?
I mean, it's a typical sort of board governance role. We have a bunch of board meetings over the course of the year. We track the progress, we track the financials, we track the partnerships. I think like any good board, we're there to not to necessarily make the decisions, but to advise and to give counsel. Key hires. We also introduce Charity Water to a bunch of different organizations. IPG have been a huge supporter of Charity Water over the years, completely unrelated to me, being at Huge. This has happened way before I joined Huge. But I think that I think you hit the nail on the head. The two things that were very interesting about Charity Water, and I've known the CEO and founder, Scott Harrison, for a number of years.
I'm such a fan.
Is a great guy. Is their embrace of technology and transparency through technology, which means that you could actually see what's being built with your money, and the investment that they made in their branding and their communications, right? Which was, I think, pretty revolutionary for its time. A lot of folks have imitated, but I still think that those two factors. And then I guess there's a third piece, which is also the fact that everything that you donate goes to the field and the work, right? That was a model that's, there's so many different nonprofits where a significant chunk of every dollar or pound that you give goes to like the admin costs and the overhead, which is, I understand. But they have a different model. They have a whole different set of donors to support the overhead. So everything that you and I as everyday donors give, that goes straight to building a well somewhere in the world where clean water is badly needed. It's
an amazing organization, and I say such a huge fan of them. So I'm sure they're lucky to have you on their board helping them out.
I'm honored to be a part of the team. They're great people.
Listen, Chidi, thank you so much for taking the time out this morning to chat to me.
It's a pleasure.
Absolute pleasure.
It's a great day to start the morning. I'm very happy.
It can only go up.
I don't know. This is great. I really enjoyed this conversation. You asked great questions, and I love the knowledge that you have of the business from so many different angles. You can tell when an interviewer knows what they're talking about because they've lived it.
Yeah.
So this has been great. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it. Thanks a million.
Cheers.
Wow, that was phenomenal. What an amazing journey Chidi has had. I love how he's moved from creative into product, how he understands deeply the client relationship. And, I see from guests who have been client side and agency side, I think it adds a really interesting dimension to your career when you can do both. It really helps you kind of understand the different dimensions and dynamics going on within the marketing landscape. The other part about my conversation with Chidi is the commerciality. So clear to see he gets it. And while the Huge model is evolving to be output-based, it requires deep commercial expertise. It was a real treat to spend time with Chidi. He was fantastically engaging, enjoyable guest. You can see we had a great time together, and thank you so much for tuning in. And look, tune in next week with our episode with Mark Ritson. It doesn't disappoint.